thank everyone so much for inviting me to sort of have a conversation with all of you with regard to everything everywhere all at once. Just a little background about myself. I'm an associate professor of communication studies at the University of Southern Indiana. And I watch a lot of television and film because I like to critically analyze texts, and I look at the intersections of gender, race, and sexuality. So this film by far is probably one of my favorites in the past few years, partly because as a woman of color, as someone who does research on Asian American mother-daughter relationships, this movie spoke to me in many, many ways. But just out of curiosity, how many of you enjoyed the film? Raise your hands. Did you enjoy the film? Did you? Okay, so it was enjoyable. That's, I think, the first step is like, did you enjoy the film, or did you, just completely hate it? And for me, it's an enjoyable film because I love having the range of emotions. Like I cry at movies. I don't know about you, but I'm laughing, I'm crying, I'm scenes that resonate with me. There's action, there's love stories. I just like the range of emotions watching this movie is spectacular. And so for me, the film spoke to me in a number of ways, partly because looking at the relationship between Joy and Evelyn as the mother-daughter relationship, I think is really central. So while there's a lot of stuff going on, when we unpack it, we see that really the central sort of core to it is this mother-daughter relationship, especially with Asian moms and daughters. And there isn't really a lot of representation when we look at film in like Hollywood films, or if you look at the US, in terms of looking at these representations of Asian moms and daughters. Besides, maybe we can think of like the Joy Luck Club, that was years ago, or recently maybe with Crazy Rich Asians. But this movie is really all about sort of Joy and Evelyn. And for me, I also love the fact that it's this absurdist multiverse. So there are times, I don't know if any of you cringe, but there were like cringe-worthy scenes as well. Like I think at one point Joy beats a man with rubber dildos, right? I mean, that's very like there's this whole action scene involving butts. I mean, it's pretty absurdist. And so while a lot of films that do like that multiverse, like with Marvel, right, we have this multiverse, we understand sort of like there's all these different versions of us. This by far is the weirdest, right? I think who would have thought that, there would be hot dogs instead of fingers, or even like when Joy decides that it's the everything bagel, the symbol of like nihilism and existential crisis. Who would have thought? Or my favorite might be Rekka Cooney, when she's trying to talk about Ratatouille, and then later on there is a universe that actually involves Rekka Cooney. And so there's sort of the absurdist stuff as well. We've got some of my favorite actors in the film. Michelle Yeoh is like in everything. Her daughter is played by Stephanie Hsu. And for those of you who were born or grew up in the 80s, you may have recognized Waymond, played by Ke Huy Quan, which he's from The Goonies or Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which is also a very problematic text. But he is perfect as sort of the husband who's nice and supportive. And in many ways, Evelyn finds him sort of as a weak character, but really in the end, his sort of philosophy of life, right? That kindness and optimism and love is what's going to keep us together, right? That is in some ways the best way to fight everything, is love is the way. And so there's just a lot of stuff to unpack with the movie there. There's also this thing called intergenerational trauma. So you see how Evelyn's father and how he treated her, right, impacts her life, and then how that impacts her relationship with her daughter. And Joy, to me, is a fascinating character because we have very few representations of queer Asian women in film. So like, for example, when I was maybe in college, I remember seeing the film Saving Face. So it was like, oh my gosh, you really don't see that many queer Asian women. And so Joy and the tension that she has with her mom, like her mom saying, I accept you, but then there's these subtle things that suggest that she's not really accepting of, I think it's Becky, her girlfriend. And so there's things like that going on as well. So there's just a lot of things to unpack. These are just some of my notes, but I would love to have a conversation with all of you. For me, the best way to unpack a movie is to have like talk it out. And so while I notice a lot of these things associated again with sort of Asian American immigrant identities and some of the nuances that very much resonated with me, even though I'm not Chinese American, I'm Korean American. I think it's important that we recognize the film is really very much about the mother-daughter relationship. So I'm excited to hear from you and your thoughts and sort of have a conversation as well. So that's my little spiel. Also, it's a long movie, so having a conversation and me just lecturing like it's a classroom is probably beneficial for us all. So yeah, I hand it over to you. What thoughts, what responses, what did you notice? What did you like?
So I am gonna kind of give a little spiel here. So I just want to thank you guys, of course, for all staying around for the Q&A. This is super awesome. But there are audience mics that are placed around these chairs. So Stephanie can hear you even if you don't have the microphone. Now with that being said, I don't have a problem talking, but like, because I do this all day, of course. If you guys would feel comfortable maybe submitting statements or questions online, we do have an app called Slido. I shouldn't say app. So you can go to, on your phone, you can go to sli.do, and then, so all one word, hashtag Cinema Center, and then you can ask questions there. You have that pulled up? Stephanie, you have it pulled up as well too?
I do.
Cool. Okay, so you guys can use that to ask any questions or have any comments, statements, whatever you have. So I'm gonna go do my job. I'm gonna go and hand this back off to Derek. And yeah, thank you everyone once again.
So is there any initial reaction or question that anyone has? Are you still sort of absorbing this movie? It's quite unexpected. First time I saw the trailer, and when I got into the movie, I thought, boy, that's not anything like the trailer. I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting to laugh so much. In fact, and it's interesting because there's the different audiences that I viewed the movie with. The reaction always seems to be different. And, the one I saw it for the first time in Orlando, and there was a giant laugher kind of in the middle of the audience, just kind of carrying us through the whole thing. It was fascinating. But yeah, are there any initial thoughts?
I would say it kind of reminds me of a live action Rick and Morty. In the sense that, but
yes,
focusing on the female relationship, because Rick and Morty always have to deal with their stuff in other universes as well. And this is just live action, but you're still seeing, the mother finally coming to the realization of what she needs to do for herself, what she's given up, and why, and all that, as well as the relationship with her father, as well as the relationship with Joy, and then Joy saying, how she feels, and that we can't possibly do anything. I'm looking for this one thing or something better than this, and we can't have that, and you can't, be at the bagel. I was about to say donut. Be at the bagel or whatever it is, and in one sense, that's kind of getting away from it. So she has to confront herself too on accepting that, and then coming back and dealing with the emotional content of what it's all about. So I kind of just saw some of those things happening.
Yeah, now I love that you said Rick and Morty, because I was like, yeah, because any episode that's like multiple universes with endless possibilities, right? Like we don't even know what they're going to do next, right? And this, or how one choice makes all of these changes in life. And I think there's like an absurdistness to it as well, right? The only way to jump to another universe or self is by doing something completely absurd, to get there. And then the everything bagel becomes, for me, in some ways, Joy's deep sadness, right? That she is searching for, sort of what does it all mean, and ends up coming to the conclusion that nothing matters, right? So if nothing matters, then why should I even exist? And I think that in some ways, Evelyn is the one that says, but that's just it. If nothing matters and I still choose to be with you and I choose to be your mom here, right? You are my daughter. And then that's what matters the most. And I love like the scene. Do you guys remember The Rocks?
Yeah.
Right? To the point of like, it's so absurd. We are two rocks, right? And right, in some ways, right, the rocks are just like the talking rocks. But right, that is that deep pain and sadness that I think that Joy has. And I think that for me resonates in a lot of times when we talk about mother-daughter relationships. And it doesn't have to be Asian and Asian American mother-daughter relationships, but these vast sort of gaps or differences or disconnects, right? That we can't always recognize. There's not communication going on between Evelyn and Joy. Like there's that at the very beginning, Joy is trying to communicate to her and she's just not listening because she's too busy doing other things. And so like that sort of rejection, and in some ways, right, her not feeling connected to her mom, that's all sort of part of that I don't say the bagel. I was going to say the cream cheese, but right, the bagel. And so I think that's an interesting sort of representation.
I have a comment. I don't know if you can hear me, but
Yeah.
it reminded me a little bit of the film Turning Red, which came out recently. That was
Yes.
so yeah, and I believe that was a Korean Canadian family in that one. But it was just because they both really explored mother-daughter relationships. And all of the trauma and everything that led up to the climax was because of a miscommunication or a like mother-daughter were not on the same page. And so I just think it's interesting they both came out kind of around the same time, but one more aimed at kids. When I was watching this, was like, wow, this is like a really complex, really adult version of Turning Red in a kind of a way.
Yes.
Yeah.
No, they're absolutely. Turning Red is definitely Chinese Canadian, I think, family, if I'm correct. But yeah, I think you're right. It's interesting how and this is what I love, is that we should, embrace these stories that we don't often, right, see or read, or I think Turning Red is a great example also of the tensions between mother-daughter relationships, right? The sort of overprotective mom. In some ways, in this one, I think Joy feels like she has failed her mom, right? Because at one point, I think Evelyn says something about how, oh gosh, this sounds horrible. But when Evelyn is talking to Jubo Tapaki, right, sort of the villain version of her daughter, she calls her out and says, you're the reason my daughter doesn't call anymore. You're right, or dropped out of college or got tattoos, or why she thinks she's gay. And so what's fascinating, right, is that in those ways, she's now revealed sort of, these are the things that my daughter has failed me, and so even though she may have not always articulated that to Joy, Joy has felt that. And in the end, that very much says, she hasn't fully accepted her daughter for who she is. And until the end, not realizing her daughter is just like her, right? She tells her father, she's stubborn, she's a mess, she's just like me. And I think that's the wonderful reveal, is realizing, while there seems to be these huge differences between the moms and daughters, that in fact, they're so alike. That's perhaps the reason why there are these tensions.
Being a 50-something myself, I love the angle that they took on this, and there's a certain sense that in your 20s you sort of plug into life and off you go, and you live your life, and you all of these things sort of resolve, and you get to your 50s and you think, is this it?
Yes.
Well, those are my options, and then it's so great. There's a whole multiverse. The singer, she could be a chef, and I really kind of enjoyed that theme, and it was also really interesting just to get the perspective of somebody in their 50s taking care of their parents and sort of trying to launch their kids at the same time. I think you introduced the term sandwich generation, which is where we're very much living right now. in our lives. So it was neat to see that perspective and cover it so well. It's really a dimensional film. It just covers so many
Oh.
things, so many age groups.
Well, and in this film, so we flash back to how she leaves her father, right? She said, basically he cuts her off altogether because she's marrying too nice of a guy, right? She goes to the United States with Wayland and gets, they get married, Waymond, right? And they have a life together, and it's not exactly perhaps what she anticipated. And then not until later on in age, right, does her father then have to come to the United States, right? Now she has to take care of a father who kind of abandoned her in some ways. And so there's the challenge, right, of trying to be both a mom and also a daughter simultaneously, on top of just the challenge of the laundromat, right? That small business. There's financial issues going on. There's family issues going on. There's marital issues going on. And so there's all this sort of stress going on. And so to have this film talk about the possibilities of being somewhere else, right? All of a sudden she realizes, right, that maybe her, it's the messiness of life, and what's most important are the people in our lives. Although at the very beginning, I think when she ends up, teleporting to the universe where she's a celebrity and kung fu master. Did anyone notice there were actual photos of Michelle Yeoh on the red carpet?
Yeah.
Like, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, they're using that. And so it's a funny sort of quick, like, oh, the celebrity images are of her actually on the red carpet, I think at like Crazy Rich Asians and things like that, which is kind of funny too. And she sort of laments on how good my life could have been. And not until later on does she realize just how beautiful life is.
And to that, I think it's something that we all we have these idealistic things of how we want to be, how we see other people, and they're all in our heads for the most part. There's this life that we're living, then there's this life in our head.
Yeah.
And so we get to see that in the multiverses, throw even more of that into that, to where we get to places, it's interesting. We want to be successful, we want to have families, we want to have children, all these kind of things. And we have these things in our head. And even though we get to them, we don't see them like they are in our head. And so that's the juxtaposition of that. We're not seeing how we feel it should be. And so because it's not that, something's wrong. Or we're not realizing, like she does, that I have this. And I have this amazing man, I have this amazing daughter.
Yeah.
I have this father that I've reconciled with to a certain extent because I have to become his caregiver. And my life is okay. I'm doing what I need to do to be who I am and everything, but it's kind of, we get away from that because of Hollywood and everything else. And so I think that's really an interesting thing in this. And I also see this actually in Miss Marvel as well. The daughter and mother are very, at this point of I think they're 3 or 4 in, they're very contentious, and she wants to do these things, and her mother's like, no, you have to stop, you have to, and she's telling her, because she knows I think that's what we do as when we become older parents. We're trying to soften the lives of the children. They don't hit the edges of life. And that can be overbearing because the child, another, you're going to say another essay or something. I have to have, can we? Okay, I understand, kind of thing. So I just think all that's in there, and we tend to not see what we have versus living also the 2 lives, the inner and outer voice, so to speak, or the inner and outer selves.
I like how you talk about sort of the inner and outer selves, because in many ways, I think it kind of goes back to immigrant parents too, because I think, right, there's something about immigrant parents and then their children who are born and raised in the United States, right? That oftentimes there's this disconnect between like, we left to start a new life, right? We're sacrificing all of these things for you. We want you to have a better life, to do better, right? The next generation needs to do better, needs to work harder, right? We don't want you to have the life that we have. So like, she probably doesn't want her daughter to take over the laundromat, right? She wants her to go to college and be successful and do these things. And so there's definitely this sort of like her expectations, and also thinking about how there's this, in some ways, split identities, like literally split identities on the screen here. But if you're talking about diaspora, right? Immigrant populations across the world, in many ways, it's a split identity. You know, to what extent, what do you leave behind? What do you take with you? What cultural aspects do you give up? And so there's also this sort of, you can tell some cultural disconnects with the mother and daughter, with Evelyn and Joyce. So for example, I noticed this, there's a lot of what I call code switching. So sometimes they're speaking in Chinese and sometimes it's in English, and right, they're switching back and forth. And when Joy tries to introduce Becky to her grandfather, she can't find the right word for girlfriend in Chinese, right? Like she's not as well spoken. And by the way, the grandfather is played by James Hong, who's a brilliant Asian American actor. He's been in like 600 some movies. Like you probably recognized him. He's like in everything. They're like, we're gonna have you again. So he's perfectly cast there. But like, there's these subtle things with language that I think is interesting, as to sort of these split identities. And so at times, I loved this. Becky, Joy's girlfriend, calls Evelyn by her first name. And did anyone catch it? She immediately corrects herself and is like, oh, Mrs. Wong, right? She corrects herself. And I was like, oh, that happens in my family all the time too. It's always Mrs. Young. My mom is not called, you do not call my mom by her first name, right? But there's like the sign of respect, right? There's this cultural difference. And then Evelyn, this misgendering Becky, if anyone noticed that. She's like him, her, I, right? And she sort of says, well, Chinese language, right, doesn't really have these gender differences, or so she says, right? And so it's interesting, some of these subtle things associated with language about how we perform our identities, and some of these split identities going on. So, but yeah, that's really good point.
It's also, it was more subtle in this film than I think we see in other films that explore multi-generational immigrant families, but wanting your children to do better, but then also the conflict over their becoming more American than they are of their, whatever their ethnic background is. This film is the fact that she has a girlfriend at all, and the girlfriend is white, Jewish, she's very well. That I think is a little more subtle than we see in a lot of, there's sort of a trope in immigrant family films about losing one's own culture and becoming Americanized and being in conflicts, or a point of tension between parents and child. It wasn't strong in this film, but yeah, it was very, very subtle. Like some of the language stuff reflected that, but it was there, and that's part of it.
Well, and I think there's subtle things, again, like I immediately catch because they resonate with some of my experiences. So like, for example, when they go to see Jamie Lee Curtis's character, she's right, the IRS auditor. And she's like, I thought you were going to bring your daughter to help translate, you know, like, I was like, oh, that has happened, right? That has happened in situations where it's seen as you have broken English, you don't understand what I'm talking about. Why don't you have your kids? And this is a white woman talking, right, to a Chinese American family. You're supposed to bring your daughter to translate. And so there's these subtle things here that are very like resonated with me, that maybe other audiences might not pick up, right? Because it's, again, sort of these just subtle sort of microaggressions that kind of happen here and there. I would like to say, though, there's a lot of martial arts in this. Right. And so some would say, like, oh, you potentially could be reinforcing stereotypes of, right, Asians doing martial arts and kung fu. And I would probably make the argument it's the opposite in some ways, in the fact that how the film is constructed is that it's only being able to access those, I call them superpowers, right, in a different multiverse. And how, while her husband, Wayman, right, initially, his one sort of version is like this highly skilled martial arts person, that's not what sort of saves them in the end, right? So all the action's a lot of fun, but in the end, the form of sort of survival is fighting with love. So I thought that was interesting. And also it kind of reminded me, Evelyn kind of is a version of what we would call sort of the warrior woman in a lot of sort of traditional Chinese martial arts films. So I thought that was interesting how she in fact embodies that. But I don't know, there's that tension there. To what extent is this a critique of stereotypes? To what extent does it reinforce that? I don't know. So, but I enjoyed it. I enjoy, like, in the end, we learn to fight with love, right? That is what sort of is a way to survive.
Did a glorious job of making fun of violence, which I really appreciated.
It's funny. Like, this is a funny movie.
I think that's not, I mean, it's Michelle Yeoh. It's like we know her. She's been around
Yes.
for a while. She's been kicking Jackie Chan's butt and
Yes.
everything.
Exactly.
You know, all the stuff she does, be it fighting or not. So she could have easily fought, but it was almost like a Matrix-like moment where she has to access this
Yes.
stuff to understand what she's doing. And then even once she gets to understanding it and be more proficient at it, then, you know, things are turning into hot dog fingers and stuff like that. So it's like, what do you do with that? You know, in her hands, or, you know, so
Right.
I thought I had to, she actually tells her husband, you know, I'm good at this, you know, and she's saying that, and then it just turns on her. And so her having to deal with herself in a different, and I think I think about Sonia Sanchez says, I'm a poet, a writer, a mother, a sister. You know, she's saying all these things she is, and he's like, wow, that's true. You're not just one thing. You're not just your job. And I think we get to see that through the mother's perspective, how she's seeing herself in all these, be it glamorous, be it fighting, be it not understanding her husband, being what she said to her husband and having to deal with that. I think that's with this film is really interesting, is they're confronting it. And even when her daughter is trying to push her away, she's like, wait. And she comes back to her and says, I'm here. I'm here now. I'm here in all these different installments. So I choose to do that. And I choose to do that because of you. And so that is kind of, that define, like she says, we can be whatever we want to be. We just have to kind of, as my mother would say, claim it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so, but it's that kind of thing. And I think that, be it immigrant families or just, I think all families have that thing that they fight with when you're leaving the nest to become the adult. Unfortunately, I don't want, it's Dr. What's his name? That used to be on Oprah. Yeah,
Phil.
Dr. Phil. Yeah, I remember him saying, and I agree with him I agree with him on this. He says, we give our children all these skills and tools to use to help them become better human beings and stuff. And then what we do is take it away from them because we go to their rescue and help them you know, when they fall and scrape their knee or whatever, and we pick them up. If they get arrested, we're there for, you know, all, so they never get to use the tools and skills that we taught them because we're always there taking those opportunities away from their repercussions of what they might have. And so we're, you know, it's kind of, I think all of us deal with that, becoming, you know, they say when you're a teen, you think you know everything. When you're 20s, you realize the world is different and you don't. In your 30s, you're trying to rectify all the mess you made of your 20s and teen years. And so it's kind of like we all go through that in different ways. And we just happen to be in this lens of seeing these females in this family, this Asian / American family kind of factor those things in.
I find it fascinating that the central plot, right? The villain, right? If you have to do the villain, is actually her daughter, right? In one universe, she pushed her too far, right? Which caused her to become Jubutapaki, and therefore she's trying to, right, track her down. And so I think that's also too that sense of, right, to what extent that, I don't want to do a Star Wars reference, but right, I am your father, right? Darth, right? It's the father, son, daughter, mother, daughter, right? And so it's like, oh, the central pain of the daughter because she was pushed too far by her mother in that universe is what's causing perhaps the end of all of the universes to exist, right? Which I think is kind of funny.
And I think he says, "I'm not your father." The father says, yeah. And then at the end, she says, "I am your mother." And
Right.
that's why, you know, so it
Yes.
kind of turns on itself.
Yeah, I think that what I thought was lovely, and I tried to find a question wrapped up in my thoughts, and I haven't. So
That's okay.
not sorry. But I thought what was lovely to me was a common thread of this notion of acceptance and forgiveness, both of others and self. You know, she wanted her father's acceptance so badly, you know, and then her daughter wanted her acceptance and she wanted her own acceptance, you know. And I thought what was lovely was that the version of her that her daughter sought out was the one that we were told was the worst version of herself
Right.
possible, you know. And I don't know, so I guess to me, like, the central theme that I thought was cute and kitschy and whatever was like, one, life is messy and weird and whatever. You're gonna eat chapstick and your own snot and and all of that. And maybe we're all just trying to be less pieces of shit, but that's okay. We can be lovable little pieces of shit. And, you know, at the end of the day, she saw a lot of herself in her daughter, and even coming from, like, not necessarily an immigrant family, but a family of color, where both my parents were born in abject poverty and, you know, bootstraps and made something of themselves and all that. You know, like, my mom still bugs me to go back into the corporate sector because 401ks. And I think it baffled both of them. And I was just like, yay, college degree, yay, architecture firm. And I'll live in an underserved neighborhood because that's what I'm gonna do. You know what I mean? And they're still like, you know, the corporate. And like, you know, I feel like that has to be confusing for them, but they still.
But they always, a plan B is always, you know, you should have a plan B just in case.
Yeah, it's that central question of what if, you know,
Yeah.
what if, and being willing to let the what if kind of go and just say, you know what, maybe I'm not the version of myself that owns a multi-million-dollar pharmaceutical company or whatever the heck I would have been if my parents had put me to follow in their footsteps. But I'm at a place where I'm good, you know, and so I thought that was sweet. That at the end of the day, if her daughter wanted her mom even at her worst version, and that the mom chose to stay in what was the worst version, the supposed worst version of herself. She could have picked the version where I have no kids and nothing to worry about. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think about, again, how this idea of it's almost an excess nihilism in terms of the crisis of identity, right? Of the crisis of, well, what does it all mean? And that, you know, if nothing means anything, then we're the only ones who can create that meaning, right? It becomes an opportunity to create meaning, that we have the power literally to make meaning with the people that we love. You know, that we can make choices about how we relate to each other. And at times, at least in the movie, literally change the material essence of things, right? Like the scene where, like, what is it? A head pops in like a balloon, and right, there's confetti everywhere. Like literally, we can change things in that way. But I think that there's something about that. We can still have the opportunity to make changes in our lives, even if we're at the age, right, where she's in her 50s or 60s, right, and there's everything seems to be chaotic. She can still make changes. They can both make changes to have a different type of relationship with each other. So
Yeah, and to let herself off the hook, you know, because her response to having pushed her daughter so far that she broke was, well, in order to combat this, I must also need to push myself so far that I break.
right.
You know what I mean? Which, you know, it's just like, let that
And
go.
there's like a moment. There's a moment. Oh, what is it? When at the very beginning where Joy like runs off, and her mom's like, wait, I have something to tell you. Like there's this, right? There's always that opportunity to connect and communicate care. And what does she say? You're getting fat.
Yeah.
And she tells the girlfriend at the end, and you need
You
to
need
grow
to
your
grow your
hair.
hair.
So the fact that
Right.
that she, like, they still accepted her as she was. She's the way she's gonna say
That's
I
mom.
love you is still gonna
Yeah.
be, you're fat, you eat too much.
Right. So in some ways, it's also saying we have to learn what that actually communicates, right? I care about you so much as a mother. I'm telling you how you can be better, right? And they sort of go, you know, when she tells Becky, I like your hair to be grown out or whatever, right? Like they sort of go, okay, you know, so they also accept her for how she is. And I think that's kind of funny.
Yeah, because that acceptance is different than having us change due to factors outside of that. So
Mhm.
someone gets cancer, if someone, you know, was in a war and lost their leg or burned or something like that, or we lose them through death. And they were like, oh, I should have done this, I should have said that. At least in this aspect, you're dealing with it and it becomes your own. These are the learned conversations that we're gonna have amongst us. And I know you mean you love me, even, you know, the hard cowboy, whatever, that never says he loves, it's like, well, I gotta go out there and do the ranch. You know, like, okay, go out there and do the, that means he loves me. You know, he never says I love you. For some reason, he'll blow up or something, you know, and I don't know, the sun will fall out of the sky or something. But it's, instead of you know, it's like we don't accept trying to change until something tragic happens.
Mhm.
And
And-
usually American movies suck because they make everybody turn out perfect in the end, and that's the only way things. Oh, the mom's supposed to apologize, and
Yeah.
then, you know,
So
He doesn't.
the dad's supposed to do this or that or the other, and he's supposed to like cry and say like, "My daughter, I wronged you." They're just like, no, you know, she's still.
Yeah,
And you
everybody.
don't have to be perfect.
And that's why we have all these shows that, you know, like Married with Children and all the stuff that comes from that. No family is, you know, when does the family get together and Married with Children? When Al says, let's rock. And then that family is going out and fighting the other family and they're together and that's what they
Right.
do.
That's what brings
The
them.
blonde Kelly is, you know, on the side throwing haymakers at someone. And that's like, how we did, you know, but everything else is just a shit show. So, but that's how they work. And we see all these families, Family Guy, whatever it is, we see all these different aspects of families that are flawed. And everybody is trying to fix them for whatever reason. But I think that the aspect of life is that it's messy. And you're gonna have, there's some things you're not gonna be able to get over. There's some things with family issues that, you know, it's amazing that she's able to get over the thing with her father. But she has to because she's, you know, she's taking care of him too. And so, I mean, you have to, I would think you have to do that with some aspect of humility and love to be in your house. You're like, okay, come on, especially when you get to the point of changing diapers or something like that, you just like, come here, dude, this can't be just throwing them around.
Right.
You have to accept, this is what I wanted him to. I accepted that. But for both of them to come to some kind of consensus on how they're addressing their relationship, I think that's interesting as well. Because she's in a multiverse, like you said, of her own, with her husband, her daughter, her father, lacking the things that she thought she should have in the world that she's in, not even getting to the multiverse aspect of things. That's why she's, the bills are like they are and all that kind of stuff. And it seems like she has connection with each individual person in the laundromat as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, she does actually. Yeah. I would say sort of the last thing I think of is how even the title Everything Everywhere All at Once, to have the main character be a Chinese American woman in the film, right? I think that's really important when we talk about visibility as, right, who are our central characters in the stories that we see on the big screen. I think that's really important. And also thinking about the title Everything Everywhere All at Once reminded me of how when we talk about representation on the screen, that in some ways we as Asian and Asian Americans are everywhere, right? All at once, but everywhere in the sense of like recognizing that we need to break these stereotypes of representation on the screen. That we should have a diversity of possibilities of representation, of visibility, and to be seen in multifaceted ways on the screen rather than sort of stereotypes. And so for me, I think it's a really important film. And it was one of those sort of under the radar films that everyone's been talking about and not knowing when you watch the trailer, you're like, I'm not sure what this is about. And then trying to explain it to folks is not always the easiest, but I think it's really important to recognize sort of, again, the representation. And this has been a very well-received film. And so, again, the idea of like the possibilities, it's not just her experiencing the possibilities of all these different lived lives, but also we get to see the possibilities of, right, again, Asian American representation and Asian representation and all these different possibilities as characters, right? From, I don't know, sign twirler to opera singer to, right? There's all these different, to at some point, I think, aren't they pinatas? I mean, I'm not sure if that really goes well with the theme, but thinking about, right, all of this sort of wide variety of representation, so.
Well, Dr. Young, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was really fun and informative, and it helped to explain a really confounding movie.
And this is what I do for fun. I spend way too much time analyzing things, so.
All right, well, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
You as well.
Yeah.